I want to welcome everybody to this session sponsored by the Carl Spain Center on Race Studies and Spiritual Action. Um, we are excited that you're here with us today as we spend time talking about the images that are appearing in our lives and how they even perpetuate race and racism as we go throughout the day. We have a great speaker for our time today. But before we do that, I want to take time and uh, introduce the founding director of the Carl Spain Center to allow him to share a few words with us. The Dr. Jerry Taylor, turn the floor over to you, Doc.
Thank you, Byron. It is so good to see everybody today and to have our dear friend Byron Martin facilitating for us again today, and to have as a presenter a young man that we have known for quite some time, a very outstanding, brilliant mind that has done a lot of studying in this area that he's going to be sharing with us concerning today. But appreciate all of you for taking time to tune into this. I think with the current um, situation that we're in as a country, warrants that we do all that we can to understand and address with the greatest amount of wisdom and insight the spirit of white supremacy and the spirit of racism. I do believe that this is America's Achilles heel, and that if we do not figure out the nature and the function of white supremacy, it will lead to the unraveling of what we have come to know as a democratic society. And it will also hinder the kingdom of God from advancing in terms of impacting the world or the nation in which it exists. This has to be dealt with. We can no longer afford to sweep this under the rug and pretend as if white supremacy is a hoax. It is real, it is here, it has been here, and it's going to take courageous Christians to look at it from every angle, from every side, and to even examine the inner region of our own being. We have to look internally and to see how we have served as a host to this ideology of white supremacy, which is an anti-Christ, anti-human ideology. And so I think Brian is going to help us tremendously today in helping us to think further and to think more deeply about this issue from the standpoint of images and how we have all been acculturated into this ideology of white supremacy. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, Byron, and you'll take it from here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Doc. Thank you for your leadership and your guidance as we tackle this important issue every single day. And we're just thankful for your spiritual leadership as we dive into it and the work you're doing through the Carl Spain Center. Um, Folks, today we're in for a treat, really a treat, as we're going to discuss how images have shaped our imaginations and impacted our understandings of the Bible, and how do those images shape our children's perceptions. Um, Even in the details of this event, it starts off by saying implicit bias studies have shown us that at least 75% of U.S. Americans possess a pro-white racial bias, regardless of their own racial identity. And we know that there are studies like that have been repeated over time. And so we're just blessed to have our good friend Brian Dewayne Scott here with us. Brian Dewayne is a visual artist from Tennessee. His undergraduate work was in fine arts with a focus on ceramic, wood, and metal sculpture at Austin Peay State University. And he attained his master's from Abilene Christian Graduate School of Theology in 2012. Brian and his wife Talisha recently celebrated 10 years of marriage, and are parents to three uh, beautiful boys, 6, 4, and 2, with one on the way. So one on the way. That's going to be 4. Brian, that, I, all I can do is pray for you, brother. Just 4, one on the way. You and Talisha, love it though. He is presently working in Togo, West Africa, through Pioneer Bible Translators, based in Dallas, where he soon hopes to pilot a locally sourced ceramic artisan shop workshop. In addition to visual art, Brian Dewayne also enjoys writing about the intersections of race, religion, riches, and the Republic of America. Brian has published a few works under uh, his printing imprint, the Black Sheep Press, including Cow versus Yeshua, um, How America's Interests Hijacked the Messiah's Religion in 2016. Really, 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 really good book. I've shared it with many folks, and so I appreciate that Brian keeps letting me snag another copy because I keep handing it out to people, as well as illustrated Bible poems, which is being printed right now, and I'm definitely waiting on my copies for that. That's my gift for my nieces because I do understand the images are at play. Um, we're going to give the the presentation over to Brian, but as we do that, I want to remind everybody, please keep um, your mics on mute. And I'm gonna ask if you have any questions, please feel free to direct those directly to me. And once Brian is done with his presentation, we'll jump into those questions and answers and get some of those in the space for him to answer. Okay. We're in for a great event today. Brian, I'll toss it over to you, my good friend.
Thank you, Byron. Thanks for that introduction. Appreciate it. Thank you to Doc for helping this material get out. I hope that what I have to present to you this afternoon will be helpful, that you'll find something in it that stays with you and that you can chew on, and hopefully that'll develop into something. I guess I want to pray real quick before we get started, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about where the material we're going to look at this afternoon came out of. Let's pray real quick. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for this opportunity to get together. We want to ask that you would bless our time this afternoon. We pray that you would use it to do what you want to do, that whatever it is that you want to stay with each one of us, that would stay, that our ears would be open and our hearts would be open. And for those things that you are not of you, that are not yours, that they would fall to the ground and would not remain with us. So please hear our prayer. Please do your work. Amen. Most of the presentation is going to be a visual presentation through screen share. And so I'll start that in a moment. First, I want to tell you a little bit about where this material came from and why it's how it got to today to be presented. As Byron said, I have a few kids. They are all boys so far. We'll see this next one if it's a boy or a girl. But as an artist, and now as a father, I think more and more about images and just the formation of my kids in general. But as an artist, images are a big part of that. Just before the pandemic kicked off, we moved back into the United States for a visit, and found ourselves in a different living situation, right? Where we're staying with in-laws and parents, and some of the rhythms of life and boundaries of things and rules that we might have in place, that gets harder to maintain when you are changing your setting like that. And so I found myself trying to stick to a certain pattern or regiment with my kids, and trying to do that while there are other influential figures in their life who aren't necessarily teaching them by the same rules per se. So I was writing about race and about images, and was kind of practicing and applying some of the things I was writing about, and then realized, it'd probably be better if the grandparents knew where I was coming from, instead of it just being, an outward perception of, when Papa says no or yes to something, that they actually saw inside and knew, why is this important? So I took a lot of my writing and research and actually developed it into a presentation and shared it with the grandparents, with my folks and with the in-laws, just as a way to kind of get on the same page. And something that I've come to notice the more and more that I look at this material and these topics is that a lot of us maybe just don't, it's something that we're surrounded by all the time, but we don't necessarily reflect on it often. And so hopefully this presentation, which is just a continuation of that, will help us this evening reflect on some things that we swim in every day, but maybe don't stop and try to analyze. And so hopefully this will be a good opportunity for some reflection, and some reflection that'll lead to some practical outcomes as we continue to grow. So I'm gonna share my screen, and I'll try to speak slowly and give us time to chew and digest a little bit as we're going along in the program. You may have heard of this before. In the 40s, there was a doll test. It was a sociological type of experiment with children. It involved a quote colored doll and a quote white doll, in conjunction with a series of questions. And the aim of this experiment, this test, was to see if young children had an awareness of racial categories, if they had a racial preference, and how they self-identified racially. So those were the three big questions that they're trying to get at, answer they're trying to get at with their questions. Awareness of racial categories. Do they have a racial preference? And how do they self-identify racially, into what category? This first doll test in the 1940s included all African-American children between the ages of 3 and 8, I believe. And in that polling, 60% of those children said that the dark-skinned doll looked bad, while 70% of those same kids said that they preferred the white doll. In 2005, there was an updated version of that test applied, this time only with African-American girls, young girls. And in 2005, in that test, 71% of those young girls said they preferred the white doll over the colored doll. And then in 2010, CNN, they hired a professor from the University of Chicago named Margaret Beale Spencer. She's a psychologist and a professor. She developed another version of that same test for children, this time an interracial group of kids. And in her results, 76% of those children in 2010 said that the colored doll looks dumb. When they were asked which of these dolls looks dumb, 76% of the kids chose the darker skinned doll. So 1940, 2005, 2010, we have a trend that we see that seems fairly consistent across about 80 years worth of inquiry. Professor Spencer said that what's really significant about this 2010 study is that the white children are learning or maintaining those stereotypes much more strongly than the African American children. Therefore, the white youngsters are even more stereotypic in their responses concerning attitudes, beliefs, and preferences than the African American children. So one of the things we want to do this afternoon is to dig into the question of how is this happening? How is this happening? How is it that for at least the last 80 years in the United States, by the age of 3, children, regardless of their own ethnic makeup, are coming away with this consistently pro-white bias by the age of 3 years old for at least the past 80 years? How? I've asked Byron to help me out with an illustration here, little exercise. Byron, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm with you, Brian.
So I want you to take a look. We want to look at this picture for a little bit. And first thing I want you to do is just to tell me a little bit of what you're seeing in the picture. Nothing too deep, just some reporting. What do you see in the picture?
I see a group of either a family or a group of students in a field, a meadow of some sort where flowers are, butterflies. They are majority. It seems as they present as people of color. Um, in some ways, different hues that are present. They all have like uniforms of some sort.
Okay.
A teacher or a professor or somebody's with them.
Yeah. So I hear Byron saying that we've got some students wearing a type of uniform with maybe a teacher, and they're out in a meadow or somewhere with flowers and butterflies. What do you imagine? What do you think's going on in the picture? So we've talked about what's in the picture. What's happening, do you think?
I would hope maybe the teacher or the parents teaching them about butterflies, since they're all around in a space where there seems to be a lot of butterflies. Seems like there's maybe an outside learning experience of some sort.
Okay.
And then kind of students exploring what they're seeing.
So we have maybe a field trip, a type of study scenario where the teacher has them out learning. Are you picking up any emotions from the characters in the picture?
Oh yeah, most of them seem happy, inquisitive, in some way. One seems like he's really trying to study what he's seeing and looking at the butterfly. So
yeah. So what Byron has kind of walked us through is that we've got this picture, and from the picture we can see that there are kids who are students, and there's a teacher, and they're studying butterflies, and the kids are pretty happy. They're inquisitive, and so what we have is kind of a scene of an event. If we had another picture after this, then we could probably build on that. If we had maybe 2 or 3 pictures, we might even have like a plot line going, a story arc. So one thing I think is interesting is I'd like to ask Byron one more question. I heard you use words like inquisitive and students and teachers. Could you tell me, can you kind of describe what area of the picture you saw those words written down with letters?
Oh, it was not anywhere where I
Exactly.
saw it written down in
Yeah.
letters at
Yeah.
all.
Sorry for that last question.
Yeah.
So, but the point is, there's a lot of information in this picture, right? There's a lot of content in this picture. If we wanted to, we could probably push a little bit further and pull out some more words. If we wanted to, we could write down all the words that Byron just gave us into a story. There's content in the images. We've heard the phrase that a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? A picture is worth 1,000 words. And what that means is that there is information in that picture. Images can even call back memories to us. They can call back memories. They can inspire our imagination to develop new stories. And these stories and memories, if we wanted to transcribe them with letters, would probably take pages and pages to actually get all that information down. We start talking about emotions and how pictures and music can generate emotions, and then you want to try to translate those emotions into words and put them down on a piece of paper, you might end up writing for a while, depending on how deeply the picture connected with you, right? Images are often communicated on both a cognitive and an emotional or spiritual level. So that what's being taken in by the viewer of the image, it could be hitting them at a place that words often have a hard time getting to. So I want us to try to take this right here and kind of put it in our back pocket and keep it there. It'll be useful going forward in the presentation. But I just don't want us to take a moment and to realize how saturated images can be with meaning and content. It's not just colors and lines on a piece of paper. There's information that's being communicated, right? There's information being communicated. How is it that for the past 80 years, kids by about the age of 3 have learned to ascribe certain attributes and character traits to lighter skin, and then other character traits and attributes to darker skin by the age of 3 years old, before they can even talk? How's that happening? Professor Spencer, who designed the 2010 study, she points out that even though the European American children tend to hold on to those, or at least express those biases more consistently than African American kids, she says that it's been shown, and she's found in her studies, that European American parents talk to their children way less about race than African American parents. And that seems odd. That seems counterintuitive, right? So we have the kids who are expressing more of an opinion on this issue and are being verbally communicated to less about it. So when we ask, how is this happening? How is this early childhood race education taking place? I think we should scratch verbal communication off the list of how that's happening. I'm going to suggest to you this afternoon that it's visual messaging. That early childhood race education that's taken hold of kids by 3 years of age is a largely visual process. Let's look at two different aspects of visual messaging in our society. The first thing that we're going to look at is volume. We're going to look at some numbers about what's being produced. And then we also want to look at narrative. And we'll look at two elements of narrative. The first being setting, the setting of the narrative, and the second being the main character, the characters in the narrative. There's a third element that we probably won't get to today, which has to do with the content of the story. What is happening? What is the plot? We probably won't touch on that this evening. But first we want to look at volume, and then we'll look at narrative. 86% of children's books that are made, I think this is looking at about 20 years, average 20 years worth of data. 86% of children's books focus on white characters. That's almost 90%. Almost 90% of children's books focus on white characters. 75% of animated movies center on white characters. 83% of Hollywood actors and actresses are white. When we look at who is running the country, we see a similar trend. When we think about holiday characters, often targeted at children, almost 100% white. Dolls, action figures, toys. Superheroes, who are the good people that are strong and going to save everybody? We see a similar trend. When we consider who is giving us our news, who is a legitimate voice to receive credible information from, similar trend. When we talk about sitcoms on television, we get also a similar trend, about 75% focused on white main characters. So by the numbers, what we have to work with, what we have to view, what's being produced is between 90 to 75% Eurocentric in representation. I took some time, I looked at 80 years, not quite 100 years worth of information from Disney, Pixar, and DreamWorks in the movies they've released. 83% of animated movies, the story that's being told takes place inside of a white dominant setting. What is a white dominant setting? What does that mean? A white dominant setting is where the social atmosphere of the story is predominantly white. We'll use Toy Story for an example. I've chosen these three characters from Toy Story because they're not human. I know that the main characters of the story are human, but we're gonna act like Buzz and Woody and Bo Peep don't exist. We're just gonna say these are the toys, right? So we have a Toy Story movie, and the main characters are toys. They're not people. But we can ask the question, well, who do the toys belong to? The toys belong to Andy, right? And where does Andy, who's around Andy? Like, who are his family? Well, they're more white characters. And where do they live? They live in white suburbia. So what this means is we have the main characters that we follow through the story, but everybody in the background are white. So what that does is that creates a feeling in the movie as children watch that type of thing. If you could imagine Toy Story taking place in East Africa, and Andy is a young African boy in an African family in an African city, that's gonna feel like a different kind of movie. And so what we're showing here is that 83% of the movies that are produced are this thing. There are some exceptions. Here we have a shot from the movie Coco. This is one of the exceptions. This is what it feels like or looks like when that's not the case. But 83% are white dominant setting movies. And lastly, real quick, we want to look at some information around main characters. So most of us, we all know what a protagonist is, what a main character is. The protagonist or main character is the character that drives the plot of the story, right? It's kind of their story. They make decisions, they have obstacles that they're trying to overcome, and their choices moves the plot forward. The camera, so to speak, follows this character on their journey from beginning to end. And the audience kind of engages the story almost from the main character's perspective, right? When the main character is scared, the music becomes a scared type of tense music, and we feel scared with the character. When the character is experiencing joy, usually the music accentuates that, and we feel joy with that character. So the story revolves around the main character. We have over to the side here, off to the left, this rabbit. And maybe this rabbit has little baby rabbits and a mama rabbit at home, and after he's done with the tea party, he has some things he needs to take care of. But that's not really relevant to what's going on with this story, because this story is about Alice. And the relevance of the rabbit is that it happens to be in the scene with Alice, and what that rabbit can contribute to what's going on in Alice's story. That's what's important in this story. Now, we might make a spinoff about the rabbit, and that'll be his story, and we can look at his stuff. But this story is about Alice, and everybody in the whole cast of characters derives their meaning in that story from their relationship to Alice, right? She is the anchor point of the story. She's the protagonist. You could say that the universe of the story revolves around Alice. The universe of the story revolves around the main character. And as we've seen, 85% of children's books and 75% of animated movies, that main character is going to be white. Somewhere else where we see this showing up is in our religious imagery. The Abraham and Sarah and their line. Abraham comes out of southern Iraq. And his offspring moved towards the Mediterranean and then down into North Africa, where they stay for 400 years in North Africa. And then most of the Old Testament, most of the story that we're looking at in the Bible takes place in that window between Syria and the Horn of Africa. That's where most of that story takes place. We can expand a little bit further east when the Hebrews go into exile and talk about Iran and Iraq and Babylon. But most of the story takes place with people in that window between Syria and the Horn of Africa. You would never know that from looking at most of our religious imagery. And the same thing's true. The same thing's true with just the world in general. I want to read something real quick. The census data of the past 10 years indicates that of the world's 7.8 billion people, only 1/5 of the world's population are white. That's 20%. This estimate of 20%, it includes the indigenous inhabitants of the European subcontinent, along with Europeans in North America and Australia and South Africa, Brazil, and other places likewise. So the indigenous people of the European subcontinent and their European diaspora around the world is included in this 1/5 number, 20%. If we wanted to be a little bit more conservative, because when we say 1/5, that includes Italy, Malta, Greece, Croatia, Bosnia. It includes Albania, Slovenia, the Ukraine, Latvia. Includes Russia. It includes a lot of folks who, if we were to transpose them into the American context, might not pass as American white folks, right? If somebody shows up from Russia or from Poland and they have an accent, they might not pass as white in the United States. So if we're going to be a little bit more, purist about it, we could get down to saying that the quote unquote white population in the world today is about 1/8, 12.5% of the global population. You know, so I wonder if a child who grows up watching cartoons and animated movies, if they would understand that that's the world they live in. That 88% of the world are people of color. Would they understand that by looking at the media that we put in front of them? In the same way, when we look at the biblical story, there are almost no Europeans at all in the biblical narrative until we get about to the New Testament. And we're looking at the Romans who are occupying Palestine. So we've taken a color dominant setting, person of color, main character story, and we have whitewashed it and turned it into a white dominant setting. Again, a white dominant setting, white main character story. We start to also confuse some of those. A lot of this is about attributes and characteristics, right? We start to confuse attributes like righteousness and holiness with lighter skin. So there's already an issue in the broader culture with images. And then once we add that religious element to it, we are elevating whiteness to the center of the universe, right? If you want to say it that way. Kids are being taught that reality is that you live in a white dominant setting story. And this story that you're in is a white main character centered story. The angels, the holy angels of God, and God himself who created you are white. And the person who's going to save you is white. All of this is communicated through images. It's being communicated through pictures. So I want to take a moment to process just a little bit with you what we've looked at and the significance of it, so it doesn't just all float away. One thing that kids are being taught and educated by looking at this material is that white is normal. And when I say normal, what I mean is that it's the thing that's most commonly occurring, right? So we just went through and looked at a few statistics about globally whiteness and people of color and what those ratios look like. In that setting, if we were to take everybody in the world and we were going to line them up in a line, in that line, whiteness would not be quote unquote normal. The normal thing would be to have some shade of brown skin. That's what would fit in most among that line of people. What our visual media does is it takes that reality and it kind of flips it over. And part of that is our context in the United States. But dare I say, the United States is not the center of the world. There is a human reality that exists that's bigger than the United States. And so what kids are being taught is that life and meaning making in life should be done in light of a lot of facts, but one of those facts is that white is normal. The idea that white is normal is what would cause a child who has black or brown skin to grow up in the United States and to feel out of place on a continent where the original people had brown skin and in a world that's 80% brown. But for that child to feel like they're out of place because of the color of their skin. So this is what we're talking about when we say normalcy or what's normal. By the numbers, that's not true, but the children won't learn that and don't know that based on what they're looking at. A second thing is that these images are teaching kids to internalize a white perspective. One of the impacts of following of stories in general, stories are very powerful. They've been with us as long as we've been, and they are very strong socializing tools. The stories that we look at, we feel what the character is feeling. And we empathize with them. When they're in trouble, I'm in trouble. When they're victorious, I'm victorious. And so that's a normal function of stories, especially the stories that we tell where it's focused on, kind of an individual character. But when the stories are, 80% of the time, they're focused on a white character. What that means in actuality and practice is that kids are being taught to empathize with white characters 7 to 8 times more often than they're taught to empathize with characters of color, right? And this socializing comes out in life and how we live. So I think about how my boys, I'm aware and paying attention to how they're interacting with media and toys and shows around policing. So there are a lot of shows that, or depictions where the police are presented as almost like in the superhero type of motif, right? And so if I, from a young age, am plugged into that and I'm seeing that and I'm empathizing with that main character, what that means is when I grow up and I see a cop with his knee on somebody's neck, my immediate reaction is, well, what did the other person do wrong? Right? And the same thing is true in general. If I see a white person and a black person out in the street yelling at each other, my immediate reaction might be, well, what did that black person do wrong? There's an instinct that's being built in that just shifts things, skews things in that direction. When we talk about a pro-white bias, that's part of what we're talking about, is an instinct that before any other information is available already has us tilting in a certain direction. And that's all part of whose story is this? Who's the main character? Who gets to set by their appearance, who gets to set the agenda for how meaning is being made? And the last thing we want to recognize is that in a lot of cases, white is being portrayed as the standard for kids. That's gonna be the standard of beauty, the standard of intelligence, the standard of legitimacy. What does it just mean to be legitimate and have a legitimate voice? In a lot of different ways, whiteness is being centered for European Americans and African Americans, is being centered as the measuring stick of virtually goodness, anything positive. When the 1940 doll study concluded, the children were asked to self-identify. The last question was to self-identify with one of the dolls, either the colored doll or the white doll. And when they were asked to do so, some of those African-American children ran out of the testing room, inconsolable, convulsed in tears, broke down and cried or became negativistic. For those children to prefer the white doll also meant accepting their own denigration. When we talk about whiteness being the standard, this is part of the equation. Dr. King said that the Negro child has been taught to despise himself and thereby perpetuate his false sense of inferiority, and the white child to adore himself and thereby perpetuate his false sense of superiority. Dr. King recognized this dynamic in society, even in the 60s. And his analysis was that this is creating a problem on both sides of the color line. And that's something that I want to make sure to point out, is that what's been said up until this point and what we're going to deal with in the next few minutes is not just for African Americans. This is, all of this applies to everybody and has ramifications for everyone. It is not geared at one specific group of people. You are what you eat is a phrase that we've heard from time to time. Recently, the idea of being aware of our diets and what we eat has become more prominent in this society. The idea that what we put into our bodies is holistically impacts our quality of life. We really grasped onto that, and a lot of folks have done a lot to try to take care of themselves, and part of that is their diet, what they eat and put into it. As we can move forward and start talking about solutions or ways to approach visual media in a new way, I want to suggest that the idea of treating our visual media more like our food might be helpful, right? So when we talk about a culinary diet, what we tend to do is we'll say, well, I want these outcomes. I want to hit these health markers. And so with that in mind, let me go craft a diet that's going to help me get at that goal, right? So we start with the end in mind. Right now, with our visual media, we tend to come at it as a form of entertainment, and without a whole lot of reflection, especially in the area of race. So what would happen if we treated our visual diet more like our culinary diet? That we identified the fact that what we put into ourselves shapes us, our character shapes us spiritually, changes who we are. As we've seen with these children by the age of 3 years old, those kids have probably been watching shows for probably a good 3 years by the time they were 3 years old. They didn't just show up at 3 years old with no interaction with visual media and have those opinions. Those kids have been consuming a certain type of visual diet for about 2.5 years. And after 2.5 years, they had gotten the message. What happens if we are more intentional with visual media and recognize the fact that habits, what we do, it shapes character. What we do on a regular basis, like a spiritual discipline, it shapes us inwardly. And so what does it look like to be intentional about shaping a visual diet that actually works and is designed to produce a certain type of education? I'm gonna offer at the end here, as we wrap up, three tips or pieces of application for us to consider. The first is to just lower the amount of intake. We've already looked at the fact that close to 85% of all the media that's being produced. One piece that we haven't mentioned yet is video games. That also falls into this analysis. 85% of everything that's produced is Eurocentric in its setting and in its character makeup. And so it doesn't seem that there's enough media that's not like that to just consume it constantly and to get a healthy balance, right? So the first thing is to consider the possibility of just lowering intake that kids are bringing in, and the screen time that they're having on a daily basis, to lower that. The second is to be more active about promoting and pulling in, while we're lowering overall intake, prioritizing media that has people of color as the dominant setting of the story, and then main characters that are of color. I want to toss out a quick note about this, what it looks like to do that. Here, the Peanuts gang. We have Franklin over on the left. We have the rest of the Peanuts gang around the table. I don't know if you know this, but the Peanuts gang was around for 20 years before Franklin showed up. The advent of Franklin into the Peanuts universe was instigated by the assassination of Dr. King. I don't know what the motivation was completely behind introducing Franklin. I think probably the artist just wanted to do something to help with the social situation. And maybe at the time this was a good step forward, but it really doesn't change the dynamics or the function of the artwork of the images as it relates to kids very much. It doesn't change the function. We still have a white dominant setting story with a white main character, and all we've done is we've introduced a Black character. And since the 60s, we've continued to see the same thing happen over and over again. The Incredibles, pretty popular. We've got Frozen, our character that's supposed to make the cast diverse, I guess. And we see the same thing with a lot of our religious artwork. We have a lot of pictures of Jesus, a white Jesus with kids who he's welcoming, and the solution has often been to put a couple of kids of color in among the white children. I guess I'd say I'm becoming a little weary of the term diversity and representation, and I'll explain why. When I think about what it would look like to undo through visual media what has been happening for the past 100 years, it would look something like this chocolate cupcake, right? When I hear people talk about diversity and representation, this is what I keep seeing. What it means is taking what we've had and then sprinkling a little bit of something on top and not really changing the overall chemistry of of the visual media. Here's some examples of what that would look like. My boys, they're using this illustrated Bible on the left here. It's called Tiny Truths. It's an example where the visual narrative is being changed. They're not sprinkling anything. They're just being more historically accurate with the imagery. This media has the potential of doing something different. It's not just going to reproduce the same results that we get with, quote unquote, adding a little diversity to the equation. You've probably seen these posters in the middle. There's a photographer named James C. Lewis, who's produced several Bible character posters through photography and approximated period clothing. And then on the right, we have a series from YouTube called Bible Pathway Adventures, which is also another piece of material that is pushing past just trying to sprinkle some diversity onto something and actually changing the dynamics of the artwork. The last thing that I'd have you make sure you hold on to as we go away this evening is because of this first slide about just how much material that has been produced, the catalog, the library of visual media that exists up to this point being majority white. Really what we need is to continue to produce new material that can serve a new diet, right? There is a deficit in what exists right now to actually do this well. And so looking for people who are producing content that fits the bill, looking for ways to encourage the production of that content, and then engaging and supporting the production of that content is also a concrete step that can be taken to help make up for lost time. So in closing, summary, by the age of 3, children have learned to cherish whiteness and despise Blackness. Because they've been fed a steady stream of white-dominant, white-centered media from 6 months onward. So we need to intentionally craft a visual diet that will achieve more empathy with people of color. There's a lot more that can be said about all this. I know we've gone a little long already. And so I'll stop here and turn it back over to Mr. Martin. I thank you for being patient and for listening.
Brian, thank you so much for that presentation. Please, in the reactions, join me or raise your hands, join me in giving Brian a hand. Thank you so much for heightening our awareness and bringing this to the forefront of our minds. A picture is truly worth 1,000 words. And so we have to be mindful of what words we're speaking and what words we're allowing our minds to hear, even through our images. So thank you so much for that. Please feel free to send me questions directly in the inbox, or we'll get some of those going. Brian, I want to toss a question at you. First of all, talk a little bit with us about how power is used in how we choose to make meaning. So you talked about a little bit about making meaning and how we do that via the images we see. How does power play a role in how that meaning is even explained or thought through or talked about in
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we're all aware of the quote that it's the victors who write the history books. But again, it's not just history books with words per se, but again, like images. The ability to, we could almost say that what we do with the world around us in our imagination and in our thoughts is more important than what's actually out there. So much of what we filter, how we filter things, is like half the ballgame. And so if I can if I can shape the way somebody comes at the world by maybe even prompting them to ask certain types of questions and not to ask other types of questions, if I can do that before they're even aware that they're being educated, I can help to maintain in this discussion a system of racism for quite a long time, just by kind of misdirecting people as to what kind of questions they even conceive to ask in the first place. So the ability to steer people, their hearts in a certain direction on any given issue, and particularly on the issue of race, I think that's really important. I think that if you, here's what I hope to do with my voice. I hope to lay certain facts in front of them, visually and verbally, about the world they live in. And I think that just by doing that, that they will come into this society and ask certain questions that aren't usually asked because they're starting off from a different perspective, right? The fact that I'm speaking to you in English right now is not normal. Where I get my genetic material from and the ancestors from where they came from, the fact, if we looked at the history of mankind and people with that, from that branch of humanity, and how many of them spoke English, and then you stuck me in that continuum, I would be an anomaly in that continuum. It's not normal that I'm speaking English. Someone who hasn't been taught that that's normal, if they showed up from 500, 600, 700 years ago and found me, the first thing they would ask is like, why are you speaking English? Why is your last name Scott? And why is your first name Brian? But we don't think to ask those questions at all. We think it's normal. Why are there a bunch of people from Europe on this continent? We don't ask that question. There's a whole stream of questions that don't get asked because we are taught to start off at a certain starting point. And so those are some broader questions that I've just brought up, but there's some more specific social questions for this society that kind of run in the same vein.
Thank you. Question came in from Kevin Kelly. Listening to this presentation made me aware that image is the product of choice that influences narratives. In other words, what we see shapes what we say. Is this not a concept of the slave narrative? It's kind of a question.
I'd have to know more about what she means by slave narrative. I think that, so one example is, I guess, what we're seeing more recently in American politics with having folks of color higher up on the chain in the American political system. And what that does for people's imaginations, right? For their conceptions of what is possible and what's not possible. I remember I substitute taught for a school maybe like 3 or 4 years ago now. And it was when Hillary was running against Trump and the race wasn't over yet. And I mentioned to the kids in the class that like up until this point, there hasn't been a female president yet. And a lot of the kids like couldn't conceive of like that was the case. For them, the fact that there was a woman running in the first place was, I guess, enough evidence that that's possible for them to not have already been kind of funneled into a way of thinking that says like women can't be president. So in that sense, I think it's true that part of what you do in a slave situation is you don't allow people who are being oppressed to see certain things happen. I think of the movie Django, where Jamie Foxx comes back to the plantation and takes a whip and goes after one of the hands on the farm. Slaves are not supposed to see that happen. Example is another type of image, I guess. So we've been discussing. So I would agree in that sense that there's certain examples that show us possibilities. There are also images, movies, those serve as examples to kids to show them certain possibilities of what can or can't be for the better and for the worse. There are a lot of negative images of Black folks in media that are showing possibilities of what can be to the detriment of folks, right? So that knife cuts both ways.
Thank you. Let's see. Another question that came in. What is your response to folks we say just making the majority of characters brown will negatively affect white audiences? Yes, the same kind of people who think Black power is equivalent to white power and KKK is equivalent to Black Panthers. What is the response to that way of thinking? So, what is your response to folks who say we are just making a majority of characters brown would negatively affect white audiences?
Yeah. I mean, I guess in a one-on-one setting, it'd be nice to sit down with that person and ask them where they see things as being at when it comes to race in the United States. To develop with that person a plan for where we would like things to be, and then to have a discussion about like what to do with visual media to help get there, right? Because it's all a response to a context. Now, me and that person might get stuck on where things are actually at and what the problem is, and that might be where we stay. I don't know. But the idea that the changes that need to be made are a response to trying to change the situation on the ground, I think is where the answer to that is rooted at. And I also would like to, it's something that people might not want to be comfortable with is, again, the idea of like changing our conceptual context from United States, North America to a global context as to what's actually representative of the world we live in. Some folks might not want to live in a world that's broader than the United States. They might want to just live in the United States, right? Even the demographics within that context are shifting, and we can talk about that too. But a lot of folks want to hold on to that context, and what I would say is, as believers, as people who have a faith that's supposed to recognize the relatedness of all people, we should push that boundary out to globally, because that's what God's looking at. God's not just looking at the United States as the center of the universe and then everybody else revolving around that. He sees the whole thing. So we should walk through life with that type of lens versus a lens that's kind of artificial and rigged and actually is the product of some mistreatment and bad relationships and racism in the first place.
Thank you. Several questions are coming in. I'm gonna read them as fast as I can. Brian, we might need to be just a little bit more speedy with the response, but take your time, do what you got to do. Do you or anyone else observe in the picture of the children with the teacher that the girl with the poofy ponytail was the only one that smiled but had a tooth missing? How about the picture of Franklin at the table sitting alone on the opposite side of the table? Representation of I guess maybe of us, even when you do show up, you are included, you are viewed as being less or less than.
I agree. I think that's getting a little bit into the part of narrative where we talk about what's actually happening in the story, right? And so, yeah, I think it's important what meaning is being made with the person of color in the story. You could have an entire story that's completely people of color and still tell a story that's not going to help build any empathy with those people or people that look like them. So I agree.
Is there an organization of media producers that could aggregate like-minded people to support the funding of artists producing more representative media images. Examples: cartoonists, directors, documentarians, visual artists, etc. I know several visual artists, but it's like everyone is trying to reinvent the wheel individually. Please let us know if any groups that are bringing folks like these together.
Yep, I agree with that assessment. I've thought about that, have not found that already in existence. I do see myself as one among many artists who are working on their own little section of this, but there is not a studio collaboration in existence that I know of.
Yeah. Someone put in the chat directly to me, Black Sands Entertainment is maybe a group that's working on that. I know there's a press coming out of Chicago called Brown Baby Press that is also working on that does have a focus on children's literature and books. And so just there's a couple of names out there. Um, awesome. Okay, here's a next question. They keep coming in. I'm gonna try to keep up. Do you believe that we should have equal amounts of white and black characters in movies and TV, or should it be mostly dark-skinned characters?
You still there?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I guess my own personal opinion, if that's what was being asked, is I'm not looking for a 50-50 split. I've told folks, like my boys, I could probably not show them, this is impossible because of the reality we live in, but if I didn't show them anything at the house that had any white people in it, I'm very sure they would still grow up getting their dose of white is good. Like I wouldn't have to show them anything, they would get it. They wouldn't have any problem growing up knowing that white people are good and just and virtuous and superheroes and all that kind of stuff. The other way is not true. If I don't push a fuller truer reality education to them, it's very likely they can grow up not getting that. And so for me, again, this is about a response to a situation. It's not just about trying to cut up the pie 50-50. We've been eating all white media for the past 100 years. So now we're trying to address the ill effects of that. And the way that you address the ill effects of that, I don't think is to try to be balanced. I mean, it seems pretty obvious, obvious to me. If you just did a visual of like, I have white sand and black sand, and I pour 100 gallons of white sand in, and then I want to even it out. I'm not going to even it out by doing 50-50 on top of that. Like, yeah, so short answer, no, I'm not looking for 50-50. I'm looking for whatever it's going to take to change people's mentalities about race at all, and especially to undo the way that the scales have been turned in the first place.
Yeah, let me do a follow-up to that one because there's one that came in. So we're in a situation where, like you said, we've had 200 years of ingesting one major type of content. So what is and from your perspective, what would be the best detox plan? Like what would be the best way to say, let me get off of this? Because for some folks, it's not just I mean, hands down, it's not just intaking media. Food is also has the potential to be addictive. And so in some ways we're addictive to that media presence and that media style. So how would we go about detoxing in this space, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably not the best person to ask. I'm kind of a cold turkey kind of person. Where it's just like, hey, like maybe you just gotta like throw away the TV and like don't get on the internet, don't give that kid a cell phone, like like shut down, like shut all the doors and do something, small and intentional. I think most people are just not gonna go for that. Like they're gonna watch their shows. And so if somebody really wants to do that, I think again, that 3-step process: 1, decrease content intake; 2, intentionally seek out and focus on that media that's actually fitting the visual diet; and then 3, generating or helping others generate the necessary content to fill the gaps. If someone does that and actually does it, then I think they'll see some results. But like doing a half-step thing, I don't see that helping, just to kind of halfway do it. So I mean, it's a matter of people realizing the seriousness of what's going on and how much, if it's for and again, like you said, it's for adults too, all of us. But I think kids are particularly susceptible to that because they're little sponges and they just soak everything up. So really what I'm trying to do with my boys is to give them a good foundation to start off on and to contextualize stuff, right? I think one way we can help do that, this is the second part of that answer, is to help try to like wrap all of this stuff up in a better context. So my sons can go to school and hear something, but I want to be able to build a narrative around that helps them to understand that this is not the whole picture, right? This is not the whole picture. So that's kind of like a stop the bleeding type of solution. Like I can't stop you from taking that in because this is the air we breathe, but I can help you put some context on that and to say, yeah, like you talked about the Renaissance in school. That's this itty bitty bitty thing that happened over here. That's 0.5% of the picture. And there's all this other stuff. And that's that one little thing. And let me explain to you why they want to spend so much time talking about that 0.5%. But we're also going to contextualize it and give you some more stuff to put it in perspective. So that's another approach to try to mitigate the ill effects, is to box that thing in its proper context instead of just letting it be the whole picture of the universe, right? God's not white. Let me tell you why there's a picture of God white, and I'm gonna box that thing and put a context on it, and you can do something with it instead of just thinking that God's white, right? So that's another strategy, is to try to contextualize everything in its proper context.
Yeah. And there's still questions coming in. The George Floyd murder and the mob at the Capitol on January 6th are all a continuum of white power. How can we defeat the uh, mythology of white power?
I don't know how much of a mythology it is. I think power is the ability to execute what you want to do. And through violence, that's, that's how the country came into existence. So I don't know how much of a myth it is. I think there's a myth of the white majority. I think there's a myth of white centrality. I think there's a myth of white virtue. Those things are myths. But the power part, I think maybe I would push back and ask for a different kind of question. Maybe what to do with white power? I don't know.
Okay. These questions still coming in. I'm gonna go as fast as I can.
All right.
Y'all. There's racial equity training here in North Carolina for youth. It's making its way into education, sadly, with less resistance than in predominantly white churches like mine, where leaders want to deny the supremacy legacy. So that's more of a statement. I don't know if you want to.
I believe him.
Somebody says, man, I love his honesty and perspective on life. Uh, he's a great model of his own message. Hashtag integrity. Um, could it be in visual images that the one who created is the one who feels inferior? So could it be in images that the one who created it is the one that feels inferior?
Mm. That's possible. Yeah. I don't want to get too much into saying what people are thinking when they're doing stuff, but I think that is a definite potential possibility that people are trying to compensate for something.
Someone says, I am confused. I do know that was Middle Eastern, but I thought God didn't have a race. Question. Because to have a race, you have to have a physical body, and God doesn't have a physical body.
I agree 100%. I've not said that God has a race. I have said he's not white. But yeah, I haven't said that he is something else. So I agree.
Hey, the first picture that you showed, I would have loved to explore it more. The teacher was lighter. The light-skinned girl was centered. The light-skinned boy and girl had pleasant and direct interaction with butterflies. The black girl with glasses seemed startled, not inquisitive. It was so much in that. The light-skinned boy seemed to have a canteen like prepared for exploration. It was so deep, and our minds pick up on all of those artist decisions.
Yeah,
Um,
I think Doc picked up on some of that stuff too when he analyzed the image. I think the person's right. Like the more we look, there's probably even like when we're watching things, there's a lot of details that we are not aware of that are feeding into the content of the image. Even just the way people are postured towards each other, facial expressions, the layout, the way that people are framed on the screen communicates something. And a lot of that stuff while we're watching TV and whatnot, we're not aware of it, but it's still feeding. It's almost a death by a thousand little cuts. So we're just getting kind of a consistent baseline message from what we're looking at over decades of our lives, right? And we're not always aware of what we're pulling out of that.
Last two questions here. Um, Even with more Disney slash Pixar movies having black leads, what does it mean that the characters tend to morph into something not human? For instance, Princess and the Frog and the new movie Soul.
Yep.
That's been a question that's out there. Been a lot of things
Yeah.
ever since Soul
I
came out.
applaud this person for bringing that up. I think it's a perfectly good. An earlier version of this presentation, I pointed out The Princess and the Frog as being the only animated film in 100 years worth of animation to have a black dominant setting narrative. I showed it to my boys a few months ago, and I'm not so sure it even passes that anymore. I think it's probably a good 50-50. It's set in Louisiana. The social context setting of that story is about 50-50, half black, half white. The main character and her family are black, but again, as pointed out, after the first few minutes of the movie, you don't see her black face until the very end because she turns into a frog. Recently watched Soul, where the brother and sister of mine took bets. I said, how long do you think it's going to be before he's not on the screen anymore? I said 25, no, I think I said 13 minutes. I guess 13 minutes before he disappears. 9 minutes into the movie, he died. And then for a lot of the rest of the movie, when his face is on the screen, he's not himself. Which what I take from that is people are trying to say, oh, well, what you look like doesn't really matter because that's not who you are anyways. Now I have an ethno-theology that says it's very important what we look like, and God's going to raise us up, and we're still going to have bodies when it's all over with. And so we won't get into that. But the impulse to marginalize his physicality in that movie, I think is also telling, and it's just reflective of the kind of philosophy of the skin that's in our culture right now. It's the same thing about being colorblind. Oh, it doesn't matter. I don't see color. It doesn't matter what you look like. Well, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe there's something very important and helpful about what I look like. So this idea of trying to erase that and also erase all the trouble that comes with it without actually fixing the problem I think that's a big issue. But I agree with the person. I'm glad they pointed that out. There's another movie called Brother Bear. The cast is Native American, and a few minutes into the movie, the guy turns into a bear. And I think he probably I think he stays the bear, like he decides he don't want to be a person anymore. He just stays a bear for the rest of his life. So this is a continually occurring trope in animated movies of, I don't know, I guess they just don't want to look at that black face on the screen too long. I don't know what the problem is, but they keep on doing that.
Have you explored the magical Negro trope and how that plays in Marvel Cinematic Universe?
I haven't thought about Marvel. Something I do want to point out is just this idea again of when you have a white main character or any main character, when you have a main character, everybody else in that story, they get their worth, their value, their function from their relationship to that main character. And I think we see this play out in society on a social level, even among groups, right? And so what that means is you're either, if you're in a story and you have a white main character, and then you have a character of color, that side character of color is either a friend and good because they're in good relationship with that white main character, or they're an ethnic villain because they're not on the same page as that white main character. I really see that as basically like making whiteness the God at the center of the universe. Like God is the one who, if you're not on his team, then there's a problem, and if you are on his team, then you're good. He is the plumb line of righteousness. And so if I brought myself into relationship with him, then by definition, there's something good going on. And if I have opposed myself to him, then by definition, I'm doing something evil and hurting people. And we have swapped God out for just whiteness in these stories so that the person who is attacking that main character is automatically cast as the villain, and the person who is helping that main character is the good guy. And we see that happen in society all the time. If I want to be a good black one, then I need to be real friendly and helpful to the white folks, and I'm a good one. And if I'm not doing what they want me to do, then I'm not good. We see that on the international stage. If there's a country that is helping the United States, then obviously it's good. And if it's not helping the United States, then obviously there's something wrong with that country. America is not God, and whiteness is not God. But those are the stories that we tell over and over again. The movies, we have patriotic movies, action movies that do that. They teach that, teach that, teach that. Same thing with whiteness. All of our shows, they teach that too. Continually watching stories where whiteness is at the center, and it is the cutting line between evil and good. It's really problematic. And people approach life that way. So it's really problematic.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Brian, thank you so much for your time today. There's still a few questions coming in. So Brian, how can people reach out to you? What is your email address, or I don't know, social media accounts, LinkedIn, anything? Where can they see more about your work and what you're doing and the work that you're doing in Togo, West Africa? Where can they reach out to you?
Yeah, a good way to get a hold of me is email. My email is Brian with an I, Brian Dewayne at live.com. BrianDewayne at live.com. I welcome conversation. I'm on Facebook. I don't use social media a whole lot. I have a Facebook page. It's Brian Dewayne. You can look me up if you want. I have a website, Black Sheep Press, the Black Sheep Press at WordPress.com. blacksheeppress.wordpress.com. I'll try to post that real quick in the chat. And then also there's I just got in the first copy of Illustrated Bible Poems in the mail today, and the rest are on their way. So if you don't know about it, this is Illustrated Bible Poems. It's a collection of about 33 illustrated poems. that try to focus on the Afro-Asiatic reality of the scriptures. So a lot of colors, a lot of pictures, and poetic stories. These, for the most part, the print run is done, but I think I have a few extras. So if you're interested, you can find those at the Black Sheep website, as well as some other stuff that's been written. Yeah, and so I know there might be people who still want to talk. Like I said, I'm open to conversation. Send me something, hit me up on email, and we can keep talking.
Brian, thank you so much. Thank you for your knowledge and your wisdom that you brought with us today. Y'all join me in giving Brian a hand for his knowledge that he shared with us today. Doc, I want to hand it back off to Dr. Taylor to say some closing words, and then he'll usher us on through our benediction. So, Dr. Taylor.
Thank you, Brian. Job well done.
Thank you.
And thank you, Byron, for being an excellent facilitator. This is the kind of information that we're going to have to develop, the toughness of spirit to be able to be open to hearing, and hopefully being able to allow it to challenge our present way of understanding. Our world is in trouble. Our nation is teetering on the brink of collapse because a certain segment of the country does not feel as if the other half of the country has a right to even exist as citizens of this country, because they are not of a certain race, because they're not white. This is bitter truth, but like all medicine, it may not taste good, but it is necessary if we're going to get healthy as a society. And so we have recorded the program today. We will make it available. And hopefully those friends who were not able to be with us today will be able to set up meetings to where they can watch this presentation together. And you'll have access to it as well. So continue to pray for Brian and his ministry, both here in the United States as well as in Togo. He and his wife, Talisha, and their boys and the baby that's on the way. Continue to keep them in our prayers, because his ministry, the insight that God has entrusted to him, is absolutely essential for the betterment of our society and for the strengthening of the church. And so thank you again, Brian, for being with us on today. I think, is Gerald Taylor still on with us? Is Gerald Taylor still on? We have the same last name.
Yes, Jared.
All right, Gerald.
I'm here.
All right, that's my brother in the Lord. We're from the same area with the same last name, almost the same first name. So I'm going to ask him if he would lead us in our closing prayer, and then we'll turn it back over to Byron to dismiss us for today. Gerald, if you would, lead us in prayer.
Let us bow. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for this time to gather. Thank you for each person that is present. Thank you for Dr. Taylor and the Carl Spain Center. Thank you for the presentation by Brian Dewayne. Father, as we go forth and meditate on these things that are around us, we are thankful for the awareness, and we invoke your blessings upon us, that we may respond in a way that is geared toward us as a nation and as a society becoming more healthy. Father, we thank you most of all for Jesus Christ, our Savior, who left us the Holy Spirit to guide us through this reality of where evil abound in subtle ways, and we just ask that you would help us to be aware of that and pursue him and his cause for the good of all mankind. Thank you so much for your love. We want to say in our meager way, Father, that we love you. And it is in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.
Man. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Brian, for your leadership in today's session with us. Thank you, Dr. Taylor, for your overarching leadership. Friends, you can still find other events to come at the Carl Spain Center website. Please go to that. Coming up, we have the 2021 Don Williams and Royce Money Distinguished Lecture Series featuring keynote speaker Jamar Tisby. We're talking on his book, The Color of Compromise. You do not want to miss that. Please go to the site and register for that. It's an opportunity to grow and expand. I'm telling you, we had him on my campus up in Valpo a couple of years back. He flipped the university around. And so we want you to come and join and be a part of that and see what we can learn from that. As always, the site is available at Carl Spain Center on Race Studies and Spiritual Action. And as always, we look forward to seeing you at the next event. Thank you and have an incredible day and weekend.